Hello, everybody. My name is Happy, and I'd like to welcome you all to my History Reaction channel. Today, we're going to be taking a trip down the Oregon Trail with What It Was Like to Be on the Oregon Trail by Wierd History. As always, I will include a link to the original content in the description down below. I highly encourage folks to head over to Wierd History and show them some appreciation if you like what you see here. All right, so why the Oregon Trail? Well, for one thing, this is an aspect of American history that's always fascinated me. As I've said many times in other videos, one of the areas in history that really has drawn me is the story of human migration, why people move, where they move to, and I'm not talking individuals, I'm talking about large groups. And the Oregon Trail is certainly a good example of a trail that was used by a fairly substantial number of people, a couple 100,000, crossing the country into what was, for the most part, fairly untamed, unknown territory, especially early on in the 1840s, or before that for some of the earliest. So, let's take a trip on the Oregon Trail. I have actually done that. I have traveled from Independence, Missouri, all the way to up in Washington to the Whitman Mission. And along the way, I stopped at places like Independence Rock in Wyoming and just kind of did the Oregon Trail, or at least as much of the Oregon Trail as you can these days. And I can tell you, it's probably way easier to travel in your car like I did than to go by Prairie Schooner or the rare, but sometimes on the trail, the Conestogas. You know, typically you'll see pictures of Conestogas, but they were usually not used because they were too heavy. But anyway, I'm rambling again. I'm prone to rambling, and the more comfortable I get with this channel, the more I do it. Oops. Anyway, let's get into it and see what they have to say. I will add what I can where I can. Not only have I gone what we can on the physical Oregon Trail now, but I've also read several diaries and journals by people who made the trip back in the 1840s and so on.
You may have experienced it through the lens of the old game, but
All right.
chances are you have no idea what.
The game was a little too recent for me, as strange as that may seem. They were just starting to get computers in the schools when I was in school, so I just kind of missed that era, but just by this much.
Everyday life was really like on the Oregon Trail. Packing up your entire life to face a 2,000-mile stretch of death, disease, and danger. Life on the Oregon Trail was actually a lot more exciting and at the same time a lot more boring than you'd probably ever think. Today we're exploring what life was really like on the Oregon Trail. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Wierd History channel. Oh, and that's just not enough. Leave a comment and let us know what history you would like to experience. Okay. Let's get on this wagon. The Oregon Trail was 2,170 miles of danger and boredom that stretched from Missouri to Oregon. To say daily life on the Oregon Trail was difficult is
the Oregon Territory. A lot of the people heading west ended up in Washington. But yeah.
Vast understatement. It was hard work and required uprooting your entire family and deciding to venture west for new opportunities. But that didn't stop thousands of people from hopping onto their wagons and emigrating into the vast unknown. Maybe it was a chance to start over. Maybe it was the thrill of adventure. Maybe it was moving away from their annoying neighbor.
Hello, Newman.
Or maybe it was the promise of a parcel of land double the size of Disneyland. Whatever the reason, people traveling the Oregon Trail had a goal in mind: to make the journey and not to die while doing it. The Homestead Act, signed into law by Abe Lincoln himself in 1862, was also a big motivator. The act said people could claim 160 acres of land if they promised to grow crops on it. Not a bad deal, especially if you consider the fact that it made it easier for single, widowed, and divorced women to claim land in their own names.
That was possible, but rarely happened. I want to say during that period of the Homestead Act, I think it was somewhere around just shy of 20% of the homesteads were claimed by women. So it was possible, but it was still kind of the exception. Lincoln would have been 1860s. So this Homestead Act, yes, it did draw people west, but this is kind of after the heyday of the migrations on the Oregon Trail, which were typically 1843 up until the 1850s. So, yes, it did help pull people west, but it's not really part of what we think of as the classic Oregon Trail. Not too long after Lincoln put in the Homestead Act, you're going to have President Grant, the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, and now there's a much better way to get over there.
You go, girl. But what was it really like? Well, let's set the hypothetical scene.
Oh,
It's
okay.
the mid-19th century. Your current town on the East Coast is overcrowded, and you're sick of living like a sardine in a pretty...
That's the 5 points in New York, heavily immigrant. The scene they just showed was from Martin Scorsese's the Gangs of New York. Great film, by the way, based on real history. It's loosely based. It's a fictional story, but the events that happened, things like the Bowery Boys and the Derby, the Dead Rabbits, and other gangs in New York clashing was a thing.
unhygienic sardine can. Maybe your friend Jebediah won't stop talking your ear off about wolf pelts, and you start to think, hey, maybe this West thing is the best thing. And hey, a football stadium's worth of land in exchange for growing a few crops? What could go wrong?
A lot.
Turns out, a lot can go wrong.
Yep.
Especially when you're traveling thousands of miles without modern medicine and infrastructure. And when we say go wrong, we mean death.
Right.
Death, 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 and death. Everywhere.
Although the death toll is often very exaggerated. There were a lot of deaths along the road, but I think the actual statistics are about 1 in 10 died. But you'll often hear people citing statistics way higher. 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. It was 1 out of 10 or somewhere in that ballpark.
Where you look, death. Whomever said nature was the best medicine clearly never tried to survive outside with just a flimsy wagon to protect them. If you died crossing the Oregon Trail, 9 times out of 10, it was from some sort of disease and serious illness.
Slight exaggeration, disease killed about 80%. So still significant, but it's not, and it's really close to 9 out of 10, but it's closer to 8 out of 10, actually. Disease was horrible. Cholera was a big one, probably the biggest, I think. Dysentery, typhus, and plenty of others, but I think those were among the biggest.
Smallpox, flu, measles, mumps, and tuberculosis could jump through an entire wagon
Tuberculosis
camp
would be a
faster than
big
you can
one.
say
Yeah.
yeehaw, and those
Consumption.
pioneers could do little to prevent it. One of the most dreaded illnesses you could catch was cholera. It
Right.
could infect someone at breakfast, and then by the time lunch rolled around, they'd be dead. Cholera. That'll ruin an appetite.
Yep. Oh yeah, absolutely
If you've
true.
ever moved anywhere, you know the nightmare that goes along with deciding what to pack up, donate, or toss.
Right.
Now, multiply that nightmare by 1,000. If you were an Oregon Trail pioneer, you'd have to pack insanely light. Typical
Yes.
wagons could carry 2,000 pounds, which sounds like a lot, but when you consider the fact that 1,800 pounds of that was food,
Exactly.
you'd have to reckon with the sad reality of ditching your favorite beat-up lazy boy, or whatever else the 1800s
Right.
equivalent was at the time. Oregon Trail wagons were packed mostly with food and essentials, and
Oh,
let's
yeah.
just say the grocery list was not exactly a gourmet situation. Pioneers brought along flour, crackers, bacon, sugar, coffee, tea, and beans. They packed
That's a-
light when it came to kitchen supplies, clothes, and other items, and they did
Yeah, that sounds about right. Flour was by far and away one of the biggest things that they packed, and they would make things like biscuits or hardtack out of it. Bacon was very common. You'd have barrels strapped to your wagon typically, or in the wagon that would contain brine solution with salt pork or bacon. The salt preserving it, but if you don't salt it correctly, you're gonna have it spoiled. So you have to prepare it correctly. Sugar was a big deal. You need the energy. The beans were there primarily for protein to support the bacon. They also would, in addition, coffee was actually pretty common, so was tea, because you had to boil the water anyway if you didn't want to die. So if you're going to boil the water, you might as well have coffee or tea, right? Some things that they didn't put on this list, molasses was often brought along for some flavoring, vinegar as well. What else was often brought along? Dried fruit to prevent scurvy. You needed to have some dried fruits. So raisins and all kinds of dried fruit fruits were brought along as well. But flour was by far and away the biggest and the most important to them, followed by typically the bacon. Those were the two big. The dried beans were brought along because dried beans are light, but they're a good source of protein as well. Sometimes they would also bring things like some rice or other grains. But these are the big ones, but I would also toss on there dried fruit for sure. And often they did bring molasses and quite often a little bit of vinegar. The vinegar being both for flavoring and for preservation. Oh, and they would always bring extra salt in case you needed to preserve stuff along the way as well as for flavoring. So I think that pretty well covers it. One thing that I should add is you really had to bring as much as you could. Especially later on, there were options to resupply. And even in the early days, there were a couple of options. Fort Laramie in Wyoming was pretty much open for the duration of the Oregon Trail migrations. I believe Fort Bridger was, or at least a good chunk of it. And there were a couple in Idaho, Fort Paul and Fort Hall and Boise, where you could conceivably stop and get some more supplies. But the further west you go, the more expensive those supplies are going to get, and the rarer they're going to be. You really can't rely on getting supplies later on. Oh, you can probably get some, but especially later on when there's more and more people going that way, you can easily run into supply issues. So let's continue on, and I might add more about this later. But this is critical. You got to bring as much food and as much water as you can with you. You want to have a supply of water with you at all times because a lot of large stretches of the terrain you're going to be crossing, you can't count on necessarily finding water on any given day. So you typically want to have a couple water barrels just in case.
Did it all without the help of organizing guru Marie Kondo. Impressive. Along the way, any animals they brought would likely start getting tired or hurt, and sometimes they'd become food as a result.
Let's talk about this. This is not typically accurate, especially early on. You did not typically take horses, or at least, let me rephrase this. You did not pull your wagons with horses on the Oregon Trail. Not if you wanted to make it. Mules and especially oxen were far, far more common. If you brought horses, you'd probably do it like you see here, leading them without them pulling the wagons. But you'll see a lot of pictures of horses pulling the schooners. That was highly discouraged. Horses just couldn't, it wasn't good on the horses to make that long a trip, especially up and over the Rockies, pulling 1-ton loads on these wagons the whole way. Oxen fared much better on this trip. So oxen was by far the preferred method, or mules if oxen weren't available. Horses were something that you might string along behind you, but you definitely wouldn't want to be using them pulling your wagons. And if you did, there's a good chance you were going to run into trouble. You were going to lose your horses.
Would likely start getting tired or hurt, and sometimes they'd become food as a result.
Yep.
If you were traveling along the Oregon Trail and something broke,
like that,
you couldn't
not
store it
likely.
until you got the chance to repair
More likely, they'd be being pulled by a team of oxen.
it. Lightening the load was a constant issue, so pioneers would ditch their broken supplies on the side of the road to save weight. Litter bugs. And hey, if you don't like the idea of seeing
I've got 1, 2, 3 of those wagons out in my yard, and including wagon wheels like this. Someday I might take a picture of them and put them up on the side if anybody's interested. My grandfather collected wagons for some reason, but they're nice. They're falling apart. There's not only so much you can do to preserve them, but
trash on the road, you're definitely not going to like this.
Unfortunately,
Human bodies
true.
and trash were treated the same among the Oregon Trail pioneers. Which
Not
is to
exactly.
say, they were ditched hastily on the side of the road.
That's
When
fair.
you factor in a much lower life expectancy and lack of medical care, death was just a fact of life when it came to crossing the Oregon Trail. Everywhere they looked, darkness waited. People died from disease, crossing rivers, horses bucking
Drowning
riders,
was
and or
common.
getting crushed by a wagon wheel. Gun deaths
That
were also
happened too.
pretty common on the trail.
Not really. They happened, but they were pretty rare. Disease, number one by far. And I would bet money that drowning and hypothermia both superseded gun deaths.
The causes of a trail rider's demise included lightning storms, grass fires, hailstorms, snake bites, gunpowder explosions, suicide, and pioneer-on-pioneer violence. If you passed on to the Great Buffalo Bullpen in the sky, the remaining pioneers would bury your body directly onto the trail so animals and wagons could roll right over it. This would help ease the scent if any wolves were looking for a quick snack.
That's partially true. Yes, they did often bury bodies under the wagon rut specifically because it helped protect from predators or scavengers, I guess I should say. But let's not pretend that they were speed bumps in the road. But yeah, there's a very good chance that they would bury people under the wagon ruts, specifically to help protect them from scavengers.
Bodies became literal speed bumps on the road. Rest in peace became rest in peace on the trail. If you're hung up on the stereotypes that Native Americans posed a huge threat to the pioneers crossing the Oregon Trail, think again. As pioneers...
Yeah, it happened. There was violence, but it was very rare, comparatively speaking. I want to say, I seem to remember reading something like only 400 deaths during the entire main period of migration along the Oregon Trail were attributed to Native Americans out of hundreds of thousands. Very, very small percentage. It did happen, and often when that happened, it was because of retaliation. Somebody did something to a Native group that they retaliated against somebody else that's passing through, or vice versa. There was always this cycle of retaliation going on. But generally speaking, the natives weren't that terribly hostile to travelers, especially ones that are passing through. In fact, often they would help as long as you were passing through. In their better interest to help you move right along, if you get what I mean there. Mostly it was fairly peaceful. There would be encounters, like I said, and there were occasionally people on both sides who just had to pick a fight. But more often than not, meetings were peaceful. Sometimes the natives would offer to trade. Sometimes that would be very helpful, especially if you were running out of food supplies. You might be able to trade some things that aren't vital to your survival, or stuff that is vital to survival.
Were passing through and settling on land, Native Americans were, more often than not, kind, friendly, and even traded with land-hungry pioneers for goods and food.
Right.
In the mid-19th century, traveling across the country wasn't as easy as hopping on a Boeing 747
Not even
and chomping
close.
down on the pretzels for a few hours. Back then, the 2,170 miles from Missouri to Oregon and California would take between 4 and 6 months to complete. Talk about a long, boring road trip. Couldn't even listen to podcasts. Wealthier...
But I wouldn't necessarily say it was boring. You were walking, you were working, you were talking to your friends and family. Typically, these groups would be fairly large, so you'd be getting to meet and get to know new people. You'd be seeing things that you'd never seen before, things that a lot of your fellow Americans had never seen before. I think there's a lot to keep people interested and excited about the trip. With that said, certain stretches could be fairly monotonous. I'm looking at you, Nebraska. The Great Plains, specifically, can get pretty old after a while because vast, open, endless grassland with not a lot breaking the terrain. There were people who were known to have psychological disorders, but again, that was fairly rare, but it did happen.
Pioneers could avoid the bumpy road trip by springing for expensive passage on a ship. But that took a full year and meant they'd miss all the wonders of the American plains.
And it could be just as dangerous, because this is before the Panama Canal. So if you wanted to go from, say, New York or Boston to the Oregon Territory, you're going to have to go all the way down around the southern tip of South America and all the way back up again. It's a long trip, and that southern passage around the tip of Argentina or Chile, whichever it is very dangerous.
But still, some people opted for a year of seasickness.
Oh yeah.
There was absolutely a right and a wrong time of year to travel.
Critical. A lot of the people who didn't make of it, this is why. You have to, there's a very narrow window of time for you to make this trip. You have to start late enough in the year that there's enough grass for your livestock to eat, but you have to get there, or at least you have to get over the Rockies at the very least before the worst of the winter starts hitting. I'm looking at you, Donner Party.
The Oregon Trail. Like traveling to Arizona in the middle of July, there were just certain seasons which made the journey uninhabitable. Except instead of suffering a mighty sunburn, just certain seasons which...
Yeah, so this would be the exception. This is much more common. Here you see the wagons being pulled by the oxen. You're far more likely to see that. Horses did happen, and these might even be mules. That also was fairly common. But horses just really had trouble making the trip when they were pulling heavy loads. They just weren't as efficient.
Made the journey uninhabitable. Except instead of suffering a mighty sunburn by the hotel pool, the consequence for traveling the trail at the wrong time meant certain death. Pioneers left too early in the year,
death, not necessarily
oxen would starve
certain
to death because the grass along the route hadn't grown enough.
Exactly.
Without oxen and cattle, pioneers were screwed. If they left too late in the year, travelers might get stuck in the brutally cold winter and have to deal with frostbite and freezing to death. And if pioneers got stranded, they couldn't exactly call an Uber to take them home. And even if Uber existed, the surcharges would have been way too high.
No, they weren't
Close your eyes and picture a pioneer traveling across the country in a wagon. Is it a boat-shaped Conestoga wagon with sweeping canopies and a huge cargo area? Good.
No.
Now erase that image from your head because it's wrong. Big, bulky wagons were poorly suited for functioning on the rugged terrain of the Oregon Trail. Instead, most pioneers opted for smaller wagons known as prairie schooners. Their smaller design made for a notoriously bumpy ride, which is why most people preferred to walk next to the wagon instead. Probably a good idea considering they didn't come with vomit bags.
And they were bumpy.
Keeping your mental health intact during a 2,000-mile walk across a bleak and deadly landscape accompanied by the same small group of friends and family was no easy task. And sadly for many people, it was straight up impossible. One darkly tragic tale of the trail happened to a woman named Elizabeth Markham. While traveling with her family along the eerily named Snake River, she announced that she wasn't going any further. No amount of coaxing could get her to join the group, so her husband was forced to take the wagons and children and abandon her. Her husband did eventually send their son back to get her, but that maybe wasn't the best idea he'd ever had. Eventually, Elizabeth returned to the family and promptly informed them that she had killed her son by clubbing him to death. Yikes! Her husband raced back to retrieve the son and found him clinging to life. Upon their return, they found that Markham had set fire to one of their wagons.
Unfortunately, that kind of thing did happen, but it was pretty rare.
As time went on, the trend of packing up your belongings and heading out west caught on like wildfire. If you were an in-the-know early trendsetter of 1841, you'd leave in a group of 70 for the Oregon Trail. In 1843, however, things really exploded. A group of over 1,000 people left from the Midwest as the cross-country exhibition gained popularity. And in 1845, the number jumped up to 3,000, making it America's hottest new trend, right up there alongside bonnets and the Mexican-American War. The Oregon Trail pioneers may have left almost 200 years ago, but that doesn't mean they don't share the same bored habits that we do today. They killed time by doing one of America's favorite pastimes, doodling. A lot of pioneers painted messages on their wagons, and many took part in the tradition of carving their names, the date, and their hometown on some of the gigantic stones they passed.
Among others, but
They basically treated our natural resources like a high school bathroom wall. One rock pioneers especially loved was Independence Rock in Wyoming, a massive 128-foot tall slab. It was nicknamed the Register of the Desert, and over the years, thousands of travelers left their marks on the gigantic rock. Graffiti taggers would be proud. To say daily life on the Oregon Trail was difficult is a vast understatement. Life on the Oregon Trail was brutal, and for many, many people, it ended in death. If you could survive walking 2,000 miles in their disease-battling, resource-scrounging shoes, then you'd probably make a pretty good road trip, buddy, today. How would you like to cross the Oregon Trail? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.
All right, so that was kind of fun. Fairly short, though. See if there's anything else I want to add. Since they brought up the Homestead Act under Lincoln, I think I'm gonna add in, not necessarily relating to the Oregon Trail specifically, but to westward migration. I think I'll add in the Civil War because a lot of soldiers who ended up traveling out to the West for various reasons related to the war itself ended up seeing the land and, in some cases, recognizing the potential of the land. And then when they returned home after their term of service ended or after the war ended, whichever came first, they would tell their friends and family, hey, while I was in the war, we went out west and I saw this wide open terrain that was gorgeous, perfect farmland. The Homestead Act is now in place. Let's all go. And you would have waves of communities in some cases moving out west, following the word of some of these returning soldiers. My mother's family, one branch of my mother's family, came to Colorado, where I live now, specifically because of that. Her great grandfather was part of what was called the Georgia colony. So some Civil War veterans returned to right on the Georgia-North Carolina border where they lived and spoke of some amazing land that they saw in southern Colorado while in the war. And they convinced an entire community right there on that border to move with them to that part of Colorado, Herfano County, Colorado. They set up a colony there, and that formed the seat of a community in Colorado. But my great-grandfather was a kid at the time, my great-great-grandfather was a child at the time, but he and the woman he eventually marries and all of their extended families and a lot of people who lived in the same town all moved together to Colorado on the words of returning Civil War veterans. And that's not by any means a unique story. Quite a few soldiers would come west, realized, hey, this is a great place to be. If I can take advantage of the Homestead Act or even just take advantage of this opportunity, because I've seen some great land, I've seen some potential mining territories, whatever it was. These soldiers really helped jumpstart the movement west. So that's a big part of some of these migrations, including along the Oregon Trail as well. And just because you made it to the Oregon Territory didn't mean you were safe. Oh, hold on a second. Right here, I have the Letters and Journals of Narcissa Whitman, 1836 to 1847. These are the letters and journals written by one of the very first women to make the journey to the Oregon Territory. She ended up in the Whitman Mission, named after her husband and herself. Somewhere, I think, near Walla Walla, Washington. I've been there. I think that's where it was. It's in Washington now, anyway. But I've got her letters here that she wrote on the trip. When they established their mission, they lost their child. So later, another group arrived in Oregon later that is bringing with them a group of children, the Sager children, whose parents had both died on the trip west along the Oregon Trail. So the Whitmans adopt these children, the Sager children. And then not long after, there is the Sager mission was, or not the Sager mission, the Whitman mission was built primarily to convert local Native Americans, but there is actually an uprising among the Native Americans because, and this is a fairly common issue in colonial and U.S. history, the natives were dying of disease, the Americans were not, and some of the natives interpreted this as meaning that rather than being there to help them, these missionaries were actually there to curse them. And there was one man there that was half native, half white, who took advantage of the situation to stoke the flames and ended up causing an uprising. And several people were massacred at the Whitman mission, including some of the Sager children as well as the Whitmans themselves. and I've actually got the account written by some of the Sager children about that massacre, or not some, but one of the Sager children. And things like that also happened. Um, Once you get there, that's no guarantee that you're gonna make it. There were other examples as well of people who made it all the way there, but once they tried to set up a life for themselves, they just couldn't hack it. There were those along the way who couldn't make it all the way. Some tried to turn back and get all the way back to civilization. Others just started to set up a camp along the way, so to speak, especially near some of these forts and trading posts that had sprung up between point A and point B, around Fort Laramie or around Fort Boise, for example. It's kind of a one-way trip. If you don't have enough supplies or the stamina to make it all the way, you probably don't have the supplies and stamina to make it all the way back, I guess is what I'm saying there. So it was a very dangerous proposition, but a lot of people did make it. Don't let people try to tell you that it was alarming casualties. Only about 1 out of every 10 died along the trip. Now, some others died once they arrived and just weren't in a condition to make a go of it. But anyway, I'm starting to ramble, so I think we'll call it good. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you want to see more stuff like this, please let me know. I would be more than happy to dive deeper into some of these personal stories like the Whitmans or the Sager children or other people who made this trip, or other trips like the Donner Party, which was another example of when things go horribly, horribly wrong. Anyway, since I'm rambling, we'll call it good. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye for now.